HOA thought she was just a harmless old lady with a trailer and a rose garden. Then they installed spike strips in her driveway and shredded the wrong woman's peace. What they didn't know? She wrote the laws they just violated. Now she's dusting off her legal files, and this quiet grandma's about to tear their board apart, motion by motion. Justice is coming, and it's wearing gardening gloves. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where you're watching from. Share in the comments below. When I was younger, I used to think my grandma's cottage was some kind of magical place, like the kind you read about in fairy tales. Tucked between two tall maples and facing a still, glistening lake, her little house sat at the end of a winding gravel path, hidden away from the buzz of the world. It smelled like cinnamon and old books. There were wind chimes by the porch that sang softly whenever the wind came in from the water, and a row of mismatched flower pots lined the steps, each overflowing with blooms she called by name like old friends. After my dad passed, my mom couldn't keep up with the city anymore. Everything reminded her of him, and the bills were suffocating. So we packed what we could into a van and drove out to Grandma's. It was supposed to be temporary, a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, but the longer we stayed, the harder it was to imagine leaving. Grandma took us in like we were never gone. She made pancakes on the first morning and left an extra quilt folded at the foot of my bed that night. She never said much about Dad, never needed to. She'd just sit beside Mom on the back porch, hands wrapped around mugs of tea, and they'd watch the lake ripple under the moonlight in quiet understanding. There was something about that cottage, something safe, peaceful, like the world slowed down when you crossed that garden gate. It didn't matter that the floors creaked or that the Wi-Fi barely worked. It was home more than any apartment we'd ever rented. And for a long time we lived there like time had stopped. Afternoons spent baking zucchini bread, evenings filled with board games and fireflies, mornings with fresh eggs from the neighbors' hens. The neighborhood was part of a small lakeside community, about 40 homes tucked around the water, governed by a little-known HOA. For most of my childhood, I didn't even know what an HOA was. They sent out newsletters with bake sale announcements and seasonal reminders like, "Clean your gutters before the frost." We'd see the board members at barbecues or walking their dogs. Nobody made a fuss. Nobody seemed to care much beyond keeping things quiet and clean. But then Brad came along. Brad Jennings moved in during a winter that felt colder than usual. I remember the day because his moving van backed into one of Grandma's planters. He didn't apologize, just scowled at the crack in his bumper like it was our fault. Rumor had it he used to be a sheriff's deputy, wore mirrored sunglasses even when it was overcast, started introducing himself with his full name like he was announcing something. Within 2 months, he was the new HOA president. At first, it seemed harmless. He sent out a welcome letter rebranding the HOA as the Lakeside Preservation Committee. Sounded fancy. Grandma even chuckled at the stationery, thick cardstock with a gold foil acorn seal. But then the letters started coming more frequently. Citations for unauthorized lawn decorations, non-standard paint tones, and overgrown vegetation. It all sounded absurd, especially coming from a guy whose own house had half a fence and a garage full of unsorted junk. We ignored the first few. Grandma was gentle, not careless. Her garden was always tidy, her hedges trimmed with care. The flags she hung were for the seasons. Nothing political, just pumpkins in October and snowflakes in December. But the citations kept coming, and something in Grandma started to change. She smiled a little less, spent more time pruning the roses in silence. Once, I caught her staring at one of Brad's letters for nearly 10 minutes, unmoving, before carefully folding it and sliding it into a drawer. That spring, she took down her bird feeders. I didn't know it yet, but the cottage, the sanctuary we all depended on, was about to become a battlefield. And my grandmother, the soft-spoken woman who wore cardigans and smelled like lavender hand cream, was hiding a part of herself that even I didn't see coming. It started with a letter tucked into our mailbox. No envelope, just a folded page with the HOA logo at the top, and the kind of formal wording that tries to sound polite while delivering a slap to the face. Violation. Notice, non-regulation flower bed encroaching on common area. Please address within 7 days to avoid fines. Grandma frowned when she read it. The flower bed in question was a 6-foot patch of lavender she'd planted over 20 years ago. It sat beside the path near the never in anyone's way. Bees loved it. So did the kids. It was practically a landmark. Neighbors used to say, "Turn left after the purple flowers." Still, Grandma being Grandma, she trimmed it back that same afternoon. No complaint, no fuss. She even clipped a bundle to dry for her linen closet, muttering, well, maybe it was due for a haircut anyway. But the next week, another notice came. This time, it was for the bird feeder. Apparently, it attracted unregulated wildlife and could pose a health hazard. Brad had included a printed image, grainy and zoomed in, of a squirrel clinging upside down to the feeder pole. Grandma read that one aloud, then just stared at me and said, "Are squirrels illegal now?" We tried calling the HOA hotline. It rang to voicemail. Emails went unanswered. When I showed up to the monthly meeting to ask about the citations, Brad gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes and said, "Everything we're doing is by the book. If you don't like the rules, you're free to make a motion to change them, assuming you've paid your dues." I looked around the room, half empty, mostly retirees who didn't seem eager to speak up. One woman whispered to me, "Just stay under the radar, sweetheart." That's what I do. And then she looked down at her hands. It wasn't just us. I started to hear little things. Someone had to take down their garden gnome collection. Another had to repaint their shutters because the blue was too reflective. One family got cited for having a hammock between 2 trees, non-permitted suspended structures. But Brad had a particular interest in our cottage. We were getting letters every other week now. Grandma's trellis needed a permit. Her porch swing was an unauthorized attachment to the home's exterior. Even her compost bin got flagged as a nuisance structure. Each notice came with a fine. $25 here, $50 there. But they added up. When Grandma went to pay them off, the clerk said she was already behind on fees. Apparently, unpaid citations accrued daily penalties. By the end of the month, the HOA claimed we owed over $600. Grandma was still calm then, still patient. She baked banana bread and left some for the clerk at the HOA office, trying to keep the peace. She trimmed every hedge, painted the mailbox, and even took down her American flag, the small one she always raised on holidays. She just needs order, Grandma said about Brad. People like that. They're afraid of things they can't control. But I could see the cracks forming. One morning, I watched her take down her wind chimes. I'd never seen that porch without them. It felt like watching a part of her vanish. That's when I started documenting everything. Every letter, every fine. I scanned them, logged them in a spreadsheet, photographed the so-called violations. I even set up a security cam in the front window. Grandma didn't object. She just nodded, as if she was relieved someone else had decided it wasn't all okay. The weirdest part? Brad never approached us directly. He never knocked on our door, never said a word in person. He just sent letters, paper bullets from the shadows. Then came the warning notice about her trailer. Grandma had an old silver Airstream tucked in the back driveway. It hadn't moved in years, but it was spotless. Her pride and joy. She used to take it on solo road trips in her 60s. That trailer had stickers from Yellowstone, Acadia, the Grand Canyon. It was more than a vehicle, it was history, memory. But Brad's letter said it was an abandoned vehicle and posed an aesthetic disruption to the neighborhood's harmony. He gave her 10 days to remove it, or face escalating penalties and possible towing. She didn't say much when she read that one, just folded it, set it down, and walked out to the trailer. She spent the whole afternoon inside it. When she came back in, there was something different in her eyes. Not anger, not fear, something still. Focused. That evening, I noticed she didn't make dinner. Instead, she was in her study with a box I'd never seen before. An old metal file case with a lock. She opened it slowly, pulled out a stack of papers and laid them across the desk. Legal documents. State seals. A framed certificate with a gold border. Margaret Elaine Harper, Assistant State Prosecutor, 1985 to 2012. My throat caught. "Grandma?" She looked up and said softly, "I used to think I could put all this behind me. But some battles come looking for you, and when they do, you don't back down, you document, you prepare." Outside, the wind blew through the garden. Inside, something had shifted. Brad didn't know it yet, but he hadn't picked a fight with the sweet old lady. He'd just declared war on a woman who helped write the book he thought he was using against her. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of quiet spring day where the air smells like fresh earth and sun-warmed pine needles. Grandma was already out back, trimming her rose bushes in her wide-brimmed hat, humming that old Patsy, Klein tune she always drifted into when she worked in the garden. I was pouring coffee when I heard her call my name. Not loud, but sharp. Uncertain. I stepped outside. She was standing at the end of the driveway, eyes locked on the ground, garden shears dangling from her hand. And then I saw them, spike strips. Not just one, but a full line of them laid across the gravel like some kind of medieval barricade. Long black metal, glinting with cruel little teeth, angled to puncture anything that dared roll across. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I thought maybe it was a prank. Maybe a mistake. But Grandma wasn't laughing. Her trailer, the vintage silver Airstream, was already backed up halfway over them. 2 of the tires were deflated, one shredded entirely. Pieces of rubber lay like discarded skin in the dirt. The trailer leaned slightly, wounded. I ran down the path, heart hammering, and looked closer. The strips were bolted into the ground, not haphazardly placed, installed. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "What the hell?" I whispered. There was a laminated notice zip-tied to a wooden stake beside the driveway. Per HOA Regulation 7.6.3, unauthorized recreational vehicles shall not remain on private lots visible from the public roadway. Enforcement measures authorized by unanimous board decision below. That was a printed signature. Brad Jennings, President, Lakeside Preservation Committee. Enforcement measures. What was this? Military law? Grandma didn't move. She just stared at the trailer like it was a part of her that had been injured. Her lips were pressed tight, color draining from her face. I saw her knuckles go white around the shears. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's department. While we waited, I took photos. Close-ups of the damage, the spike strips, the posted sign. I checked the neighbors' driveways. None of them had strips, even though I knew the family 2 houses down had an RV parked out back. The deputy arrived 20 minutes later. He stepped out of the cruiser, took one look at the strips, and muttered, "Jesus." I handed him the HOA notice and explained what had happened. He listened, nodded slowly, then said the words I didn't want to hear. "This looks like a civil matter. Private property, HOA jurisdiction. We can't really intervene unless there's a clear criminal act or threat to public safety." "Are you kidding me?" I said. They damaged our property. They'll argue it was in violation of their code, he replied with a tired shrug. Best advice? Document it. Get a lawyer. Take it up with the county housing board. I could see the apology in his eyes, but that didn't help. Grandma didn't say a word the entire time. When he left, she finally walked up to the trailer. Slowly. She rested her hand against its dented frame, fingers brushing over the national park stickers like she was touching memories. I bought this in '81, she said quietly. First time I ever drove west. Slept under the stars in Zion, saw a grizzly in Glacier. She paused. It was my way back to myself after the divorce. That trailer, she kept me moving forward. Then she turned, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. And now they've gutted her like roadkill. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip those strips out of the ground with my bare hands. But Grandma? She didn't cry, she didn't yell. She just walked inside and didn't come out for the rest of the day. I checked on her that night. She was sitting at her desk with a cup of untouched tea, staring at the same file box from before. Her back was stiff, her eyes unreadable. I'd never seen her like that. Not when my dad died, not when the cancer scare happened, not when we lost the house. It wasn't just sadness, it was something deeper. A silence that felt sharp, the kind of silence before a storm. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept going over the photos, over the citations, over every meeting note I'd taken. I dug deeper into the HOA's charter, looked into Brad's election, started checking public property records. That night, something shifted inside me too. This wasn't about gardening violations anymore. This was a line crossed, a boundary breached. And whether Brad knew it or not, he'd just made the most dangerous move of all. He humiliated a woman who had spent a lifetime enforcing laws, and he'd done it thinking she was just someone's sweet little grandma. He was about to find out who she really was. Grandma stopped baking. That's when I knew something had shifted. No more warm bread cooling on the windowsill. No cinnamon muffins wrapped in napkins for the neighbors. The kitchen, once the cozy heart of the house, felt cold now, still spotless, but untouched. She spent more and more time in her study. The door cracked just enough to see the warm light spilling out late into the night. I'd pass by on my way to bed and hear papers rustling, the occasional metallic click of a stapler, and once the whir of an old printer I didn't even know she still had. She didn't speak much those days. Not out of sadness, at least not entirely, but from concentration. There was something calculating behind her quiet, like a clock ticking just before an alarm goes off. I remember the night it became real. It was close to midnight and I couldn't sleep again. I walked past her study, meaning to go straight to the kitchen, but something made me stop. The door was ajar, more than usual. Inside, Grandma sat hunched at her desk, wearing her old wire-frame glasses, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun. The desk was covered, not cluttered, but covered, with documents. Neatly stacked, color-coded, annotated in clean, deliberate handwriting, legal documents. I stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. I saw HOA bylaws, land zoning maps, copies of meeting minutes, and, most startling, printouts from county court records. A yellow highlighter swept across lines of legalese with surgical precision. On her monitor, she had pulled up the HOA incorporation filings and tax documentation. And sitting at the edge of the desk was a leather folder. I recognized it. It had always sat on the top shelf of the living room bookshelf, unopened. A decoration, I'd thought. Part of the cottage's old-world charm. It wasn't. She opened it, revealing her framed certification from the state bar and an ID badge with her younger face. More color in her cheeks, but the same exact eyes. Below it, Margaret E. Harper, State Prosecutor, Department of Justice. She must have sensed me watching. "Come in, sweetheart," she said, not turning around. I froze, then pushed the door open. Her voice was calm but different, firm, like it had found its edge again. "I guess it's time you knew." I sat down slowly, my heart climbing into my throat. "You were a prosecutor?" "For 27 years, she said. "Mostly land use, fraud, white-collar cases. I specialized in municipal abuse and real estate corruption." My jaw actually dropped. You were that kind of prosecutor?" She gave a small, tired smile. "They used to call me the Velvet Hammer. Always polite, never raised my voice, but when I filed a motion, people cleared their calendars." I stared at her. I didn't know what stunned me more, that she'd hidden it all these years, or that it suddenly made sense. The way she read people, her precise memory, the way she always stayed calm, even when she was being pushed. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "I didn't want to carry it anymore," she said. "After your father died, I realized how short life is. I wanted peace. This cottage, it was the first place I ever lived without a pager on the nightstand." She looked out the window where the moonlight lit the driveway, the same driveway where her trailer still sat, wounded. "I thought I'd buried that life, but some things don't stay buried, not when the ground keeps getting disturbed." There was a long silence between us. Not uncomfortable, just heavy, loaded. "I didn't want to be that person again," she said softly, "but they've left me no choice." I looked down at the papers, at her notes, the surgical precision of it all. She wasn't just angry, she was building a case. Grandma had slipped back into the skin of a state prosecutor like she'd never left. "Brad thinks he's playing HOA politics," she said. "But he's altered legal codes without due process. He's used intimidation and unauthorized enforcement. And if I'm reading these audits correctly, he's funneling HOA funds into a private management company he quietly registered last year." I blinked. "Wait, what?" She turned the screen toward me. There it was. Brad Jennings, listed as managing partner of a consulting firm contracted by the HOA for community infrastructure optimization. "That's embezzlement, sweetheart," she said. "On a good day, on a bad day, it's racketeering." A chill ran through me. I thought we were just dealing with a bitter man on a power trip. But Grandma had peeled back the curtain, and what she saw wasn't just petty tyranny. It was criminal. She stood up slowly, walking over to the old file cabinet in the corner. "I'm reopening the Harper files," she said. "Tomorrow we draft our first motion." I watched her. This woman who raised me on homemade jam and bedtime stories, now unfolding a legal war map on her desk like a general returning to the battlefield. And for the first time since the spike strips, I didn't feel helpless. I felt protected. Brad didn't know it yet, but the quiet woman he tried to push around had once put mayors in prison, and now she was coming for him, with the full force of the law and a vengeance sharpened by time. 3 days after Grandma revealed her past, the house felt different. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was focused, purposeful. The kitchen table was now her war desk. Stacks of legal papers, HOA charters, scanned checks, and sticky notes in her unmistakable script lined every inch. Highlighters were scattered beside old leather-bound law books and a humming laptop that hadn't seen the light of day in years. Every morning started the same. Fresh coffee, a pressed blouse, and her reading glasses. No apron, no garden gloves, just quiet intensity. That was the morning she slid the freshly printed document across the table toward me. The title was sharp and unmistakable. "Cease and Desist, Unlawful Enforcement and Governance Breach." I looked up at her. "It's ready?" She nodded. "It's more than ready. It's airtight." That afternoon, she filed the cease and desist with the county clerk's office, and, without a word to the HOA, submitted a formal injunction request against the Lakeside Preservation Committee for overreach, lack of due process, and breach of fiduciary responsibility. The HOA laughed it off at first. We heard it from Mrs. Lindstrom, who walked by the next day with her Pomeranian and whispered, Brad called it Old Lady Paperwork Theater. Said it would all be tossed by the weekend. Grandma just smiled. She didn't argue, she didn't explain, because she knew what was coming. 2 mornings later, a black SUV rolled down our road, unmarked. Government plates. A state marshal stepped out in full uniform, jacket, badge, the whole show. He walked directly up the front steps of the HOA office, which was really just a repurposed tool shed behind Brad's house. Clipboard in hand, envelope in the other. He knocked once. Waited. Knocked again, louder. I watched from our front window, heart pounding in my ears. Brad finally opened the door in sweatpants and a hoodie, looking like he hadn't shaved in days. The marshal handed him the envelope and said something none of us could hear. Brad's entire posture shifted. He looked down at the papers, then back up at the marshal. No cameras, Grandma murmured beside me, sipping her tea. But we won't need them. It's in the official record now. Word spread like wildfire. By noon, the neighborhood group chat, yes, I had finally joined it, was lit up with questions. Something was wrong. Something big. People started walking their dogs more than usual, lingering near the HOA office. Nobody said much, but you could feel it. Then came the whispers. She found something in the budget, Mr. Arlo said under his breath at the mailboxes. Apparently, Brad's been double billing for lawn care and pocketing the difference. He changed the bylaws without a vote, Mrs. Lindstrom added. That's what my daughter says. She's a paralegal. Grandma hadn't just sent papers. She had filed a formal audit request with the County Oversight Board, along with evidence of bylaw manipulation and forged voter counts from last year's election. See, while Brad was busy micromanaging mailbox colors and outlawing lawn flamingos, Grandma had unearthed the HOA's skeleton closet. Every shady reimbursement, every phantom vendor. Every last amendment passed without quorum. I knew it didn't smell right, she said one evening, thumbing through receipts. No one pays $800 a month for community beautification when the park bench still has a busted leg. Then we started seeing it, signs of panic. Board members stopped waving when they passed us. The always chipper secretary, Gail, stopped posting her usual garden updates on Facebook. Instead, she was seen whispering to another member in the back of the community center, both clutching manila folders like they were hiding state secrets. Brad, meanwhile, had gone quiet. No newsletters, no fines. Not a single citation since the injunction was filed. One afternoon, I caught him standing across the street, arms crossed, just staring at the cottage. Not menacing, more like stunned, like he was trying to piece together how things had flipped so fast. Grandma didn't even blink. She was already drafting the next motion. Brad underestimated me, she said, matter of fact. He thought I was someone he could push into silence. He forgot the first rule of power. It doesn't always look the way you expect. She leaned back, tapping a pen thoughtfully. He picked a legal fight in my arena. Now he gets to play by my rules. And for the first time since this all began, I felt something shift in me, too. Not just relief, but pride. Pride in the woman who raised me, who had traded her garden gloves for legal briefs and was tearing down corruption with the same quiet resolve she once used to bake pies and raise a family. Retribution had begun, and the board had no idea just how deep she was willing to go. We knew they wouldn't go quietly. The cease and desist had landed like a legal grenade, and Grandma's motion for injunction had drawn blood. Brad and his board didn't crumble. They regrouped. And then they hit back, hard. It started with a letter from Child Protective Services, a plain white envelope in our mailbox. No return address, just a state seal. Inside was a typed notice. An anonymous report had been filed, claiming the home environment was unstable, with potential endangerment to minors present in the household. I read it 3 times before I could even speak. We didn't have minors living full-time in the house, just my niece and nephew who stayed over on weekends when my sister needed help. But the implication was enough. A black mark, a threat. Grandma read the letter in silence, then folded it, placed it on the kitchen table, and whispered, "They're trying to rattle us." An agent visited the following week, polite, professional, and clearly skeptical of the claim. She took a quick look around, found nothing, of course, and left after 20 minutes. But the damage had been done. The idea of it, that someone would go that low, curdled my stomach. Then came the code violations. We received 3 in 1 week. Unauthorized exterior lighting, non-standard mailbox dimensions, and the kicker, hazardous garden overgrowth. The garden overgrowth citation came with a photograph, printed in black and white. You could barely make out the image, but there it was. Grandma's rose bushes. "They're citing me for flowers," she said, her voice icy. The next day, 2 men in khakis and matching HOA branded polos parked across the street, scribbling notes on clipboards and pointing at our house. No greetings, no explanations. Just watching. "They're casing us," I muttered, "like we're criminals." But they weren't after just us. They went after the neighbors, too. Mr. Arlo, who'd once mentioned he thought the HOA fees were too high, suddenly had to repaint his garage door or face a fine. The woman 2 doors down got a warning about unauthorized composting. People we used to wave to every morning started crossing the street, avoiding eye contact. It wasn't paranoia, it was pressure. Classic divide and conquer. But what Brad didn't realize was that Grandma had already anticipated the board's counterpunch. And she wasn't just defending herself anymore, she was recruiting. She started holding what she called coffee chats in the backyard, informal, casual. At first, it was just Mrs. Lindstrom and one of the single dads from the cul-de-sac. They came for pie, they stayed for the truth. Grandma laid it all out. The falsified budgets, the bylaw tampering, the phantom vendors Brad had funneled payments to. She showed them proof, real documents, not rumors, and more importantly, she listened, because she knew everyone had their story. Mr. Arlo had been fined $200 for a flagpole that was too tall, installed 5 years before Brad even moved in. Another woman, Kayla, had been denied permission to build a wheelchair ramp for her mother. She still did it, but the board fined her weekly until her mom passed. One by one, the stories poured out, and Grandma wrote everything down. She started collecting sworn affidavits, notarized statements detailing years of abuse, intimidation, and fabricated violations. She kept them organized in a blue accordion folder she carried like a shield. Names, dates, signatures, even photo evidence. It turned out that half the community hated the board. They'd just been too afraid or too tired to fight. Now they had someone to stand behind, someone who wasn't afraid. One evening, as dusk settled and fireflies blinked across the yard, I counted 11 people seated in our backyard. Some with lawn chairs, others on the porch steps. They listened as Grandma explained the process for dissolving and reforming an HOA board under state statute. She passed around copies of the community charter and highlighted the exact clauses Brad had been violating. There was a moment, just a flicker, where it felt like we were winning. Then came the letters. Anonymous, of course. Slipped into mailboxes late at night. They accused Grandma of fraud, said she was power-hungry, that she was trying to take over the neighborhood. One even said she was mentally unwell and conspiring with outsiders. That one hit me hardest. I'd seen her pour every ounce of herself into this fight, not for glory, but for justice. And now they were trying to turn her legacy into a weapon. But instead of reacting with rage, she simply said, "If they're getting desperate enough to lie, it means the truth is working." Still, I saw it in her eyes. How much it cost her. The toll of the fight. We doubled down. I installed more cameras. We digitized every affidavit. Sent sealed packets to a trusted law firm downtown, just in case. Because the fight was no longer about citations or trailers. This was about the soul of the neighborhood. About who got to say what was allowed, who mattered, who got to feel safe in their own home. The board had struck back with all the force it could muster, but they had underestimated what it meant to awaken a community, to poke a sleeping giant in floral gardening gloves. And now that the neighborhood had started to whisper, some louder than others, Brad's empire was starting to crack. The silence wasn't compliance anymore. It was a fuse, burning toward something explosive. We walked into the county courthouse under gray skies, and tension. Grandma wore navy. Not just any navy suit, the one she'd saved from her final year in office. Crisp, tailored, and dignified, with a small silver pin on her lapel that looked like a dove. Peaceful, but pointed. The hearing room was packed. Neighbors, HOA members, and even a few local reporters filled the benches, murmuring with nervous curiosity. Some were here to support her. Others had come expecting a spectacle. They were about to get both. At the front of the room, Brad sat with his lawyer, a smug, sharp-jawed man with a Bluetooth in one ear and an air of corporate arrogance. Brad looked paler than usual, though. His tie was askew. His leg bounced beneath the table. The HOA had filed a civil suit for defamation, claiming Grandma had maliciously damaged the reputation and standing of the Lakeside Preservation Committee through baseless allegations and public slander. They thought they were putting her on trial. They didn't realize she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. When the judge called the room to order, the energy shifted. It felt like a storm cloud had just rolled in, quiet, heavy, full of static. Grandma stood slowly, unfolding her reading glasses and placing a binder on the podium. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm and steady, "I intend to demonstrate that not only were my statements grounded in fact, but that the actions of the HOA board constitute violations of municipal code, fiduciary misconduct, and willful fraud." Brad's lawyer scoffed. "Your Honor, the defendant has no standing to bring forth unrelated allegations. This is a defamation case." The judge, a middle-aged woman with eyes that missed nothing, tilted her head. "Let's hear what she has to say," she said. Grandma opened the binder. Page after page, she walked the court through her investigation. She spoke with precision, laying out the timeline of altered bylaw amendments, how several were passed without quorum or community vote. She showed side-by-side comparisons of original charters and their modified versions. Then came the financials. She revealed that Brad had authorized multiple payments to a landscaping firm named Greenline Property Solutions. The company had no listed address, no business license, and no tax ID, just a bank routing number and a series of checks bearing Brad's signature. The room murmured. I watched as Gail, the HOA secretary, visibly shrank in her seat. But Grandma wasn't finished. She flipped to the final section. The courtroom screen lit up as she connected her laptop to the projector. There, in black and white, was a set of scanned bank statements. "Your Honor," she said, "this is a summary of HOA expenditures from the last fiscal year. You'll note several monthly payments, $1,957.62, labeled grounds maintenance." She paused. Now, here, she continued, clicking to the next page, are mortgage payment records for Brad Jennings's personal residence. The same amount, same date, same routing number. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Brad's face went red, then white. His lawyer leaned in, whispering furiously. The judge raised a hand. Is this evidence verified? I subpoenaed the records last month, Grandma replied, holding up a sealed copy. They arrived this morning. The judge turned to Brad, who now looked like he might faint. Mr. Jennings, do you have an explanation for this? His lawyer stammered. We object to the— I didn't ask your attorney, the judge snapped. Mr. Jennings, Brad opened his mouth, closed it, rubbed a shaking hand over his jaw. I didn't mean to. The judge leaned back in her chair. Effective immediately, I am ordering a full independent audit of the HOA's financial records. Furthermore, the court finds sufficient cause to question the legitimacy of the plaintiff's claims. Motion to dismiss the defamation suit is granted. The gavel struck like thunder, and just like that, it was over. Gasps turned to whispers. Neighbors turned to one another in shock, some in awe. A few even clapped. Grandma stepped down from the podium like she was walking out of church. Calm, grounded, graceful. Outside, the clouds had finally parted. Sunlight streamed across the courthouse steps as we walked out. A local reporter tried to ask her for a statement. Grandma smiled politely and said, "The documents speak for themselves." Brad slunk out the back. That night, the group chat exploded. People who had stayed silent were now emboldened. One neighbor posted, "I always thought something was off. Margaret Harper is a legend." Another wrote, "That's our state prosecutor." It wasn't just about one courtroom victory. It was about what it meant. Brad had weaponized rules and silence. Grandma had answered with law and truth. And now the whole neighborhood had seen the truth laid bare, projected for everyone to witness, undeniable and permanent. It was no longer her fight, it had become ours. 2 weeks after the courtroom bombshell, we returned to the courthouse, this time for the final ruling. The room wasn't as crowded now. Just the key parties, the court clerk, and the judge who had heard it all. But the air still buzzed with tension, like the moment before a storm breaks or a long-held breath finally releases. Brad sat at the far end of the room, slumped in his chair like the fight had already drained out of him. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just a wrinkled shirt, sleeves rolled up, eyes vacant. His lawyer sat stiffly beside him, lips pressed into a hard line. Grandma sat calmly at the defendant's table, hands folded, posture straight, expression unreadable. The judge entered briskly, a folder under one arm. She wasted no time. This court has reviewed all evidence submitted regarding the conduct of the Lakeside Preservation Committee, particularly regarding the matter of property damage, misuse of authority, and alleged retaliatory enforcement against Margaret Harper. The room fell into still silence. It is the opinion of this court that the HOA, under the direction of President Brad Jennings, engaged in a pattern of targeted harassment, culminating in the malicious installation of tire-destroying spike strips on Miss Harper's property. She turned slightly toward Brad. This action was not only unauthorized, it was criminally negligent. The claim that this was a justified enforcement measure is absurd. My heart thudded in my chest. I looked at Grandma. She didn't blink. The judge continued. In addition to property damages, the court finds substantial evidence of misappropriation of community funds, unauthorized amendments to HOA governance documents, and manipulation of voting procedures. She paused. Therefore, effective immediately, the current HOA charter is hereby suspended pending full forensic audit. All executive board members are placed under formal review. Mr. Jennings is removed from his position as president, and criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud are being referred to the district attorney's office. There was a collective inhale in the room. Even Brad's lawyer lowered his head. Then the judge turned to Grandma. "Miss Harper, your motion to file for damages has been granted. You will be reimbursed for the destruction of your trailer's tires and compensated for emotional distress. You may also pursue further civil action if you wish." Grandma nodded once. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge gave her a measured look. "You've demonstrated a deep understanding of both the law and the responsibility it carries. I'd recommend you consider leading the new charter formation once the audit concludes." There was a pause. Everyone looked at her. Grandma smiled softly. "No, thank you," she said. "I came here for peace, not power." And with that, it was done. Outside the courthouse, the breeze was light. The sun cut through soft spring clouds, and for the first time in months, I saw Grandma close her eyes and breathe. There was no celebration, no victory parade, just quiet relief. Back at the cottage, neighbors began stopping by. Some brought flowers, others brought apologies. A few brought paperwork, hoping to help form the new board when the time came. But Grandma didn't join those conversations. She was out back, kneeling in the dirt, carefully trimming back her rose bushes. I stepped onto the porch, watching her work, sunlight catching in her silver hair. "You're really not going to run for the board?" I asked. She looked up at me with a small, knowing smile. "Sweetheart," she said, brushing soil from her gloves, "I've already done my time in that world. Justice isn't a seat, it's what you do with your hands when no one's watching." Then she turned back to her roses, humming quietly, an old tune I hadn't heard in a long time. The garden had returned, and so had she. The spike strips were gone by the end of the week. A quiet crew from the new interim HOA board, neighbors this time, not strangers in branded polos, showed up early one morning with crowbars and heavy gloves. They didn't speak much, just nodded respectfully to Grandma and got to work. It took less than an hour to pull them from the gravel. What took longer was the planting. Grandma waited until the ground had been cleared, leveled, and swept clean. Then she went to the back shed and returned with a tray of potted roses, deep crimson, soft blush, and one in a shade of orange so bright it practically glowed in the sun. I watched her kneel at the edge of the driveway, hands moving with slow reverence, scooping soil and settling each flower into place with the same care she used to wrap Christmas presents. "These are firelight climbers," she said without looking up. "Tough as nails. They'll grow back every spring no matter how cold the winter gets." I didn't need to ask why she chose them. Each bloom went exactly where the spikes had been, every wound in the earth filled with color and life. By the time she finished, the air was thick with the smell of cut stems and fresh dirt. It didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a home again. The trailer came back a week later, newly restored and polished, courtesy of the HOA's restitution payout. The same silver shell, the same faded national park stickers still intact, but now with reinforced tires and a quiet dignity, like a war hero returning from a long campaign. Neighbors stopped by to admire it. A few asked Grandma if she planned to hit the road again, now that things were calm. She smiled politely but said nothing. She didn't need to. The cottage had everything she needed. The days slipped back into rhythm, slow, peaceful, deliberate. Birdsong at dawn, the creak of the porch swing at dusk, tea brewing in the morning. She baked again, this time raspberry scones. And every evening she wandered into the garden with a trowel in one hand and a notebook in the other, jotting down blooming times, leaf shapes, soil notes. It was her way of documenting again, but this time, life instead of injustice. It wasn't until much later that I realized what she'd taught us. She never raised her voice. She never sought revenge, she simply refused to be diminished. She showed us that dignity doesn't need noise, that strength can look like silence, like kindness, like patience that stretches across decades. And when the world finally saw her, not just as a grandmother but as the woman she had always been, it bowed quietly in respect. She went back to her garden, but now we all knew peace was never weakness. It was power under control. If you've ever watched a petty rule turn into real damage, you already know this story's not rare. It's a warning. There's a war happening behind picket fences, and not every hero carries a badge. Some carry pruning shears. Keep your eyes open, your documents backed up, and your garden gloves ready. Because the next HOA horror might be yours, and when it hits, you'll want to remember how she handled it.